The shy rancher's life changes forever when an Apache woman rides into his world. Daniel Harper had always lived a life shaped by quiet routine. The vast stretches of land he called home were both a blessing and a burden. The ranch had belonged to his family for generations, and ever since his parents passed, it had been just him and the land. From dawn to dusk he worked tirelessly, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and repairing barns that had seen better days. The wide open prairie around him was beautiful in its way, with rolling hills, golden grass that swayed in the wind, and distant mountains that rose like silent guardians. Yet the emptiness often felt heavy. Every morning Daniel woke with the sun, the soft glow spilling through the curtains of his small wooden house. He would brew a strong cup of coffee and step outside onto the porch, breathing in the crisp, clean air. The smell of the earth and the faint scent of the river nearby were the only perfumes of his mornings. Most days, the silence pressed in on him, but he had grown used to it. Animals were his companions: cows, horses, and a stubborn old dog named Rust. They did not judge or demand conversation, and Daniel often preferred it that way. Life on the ranch required discipline, and Daniel was a man who valued structure. He rose early, fed the cattle, checked the fences, and rode out to inspect the pastures. Sometimes he would work from sunrise to sunset without seeing another person. In town he was known as a quiet man, polite but distant. Few ventured onto the Harper Ranch unless invited, and Daniel did not often seek company. Social gatherings felt overwhelming, loud, and unnecessary. He found comfort in the predictable rhythm of the land. Each day followed a familiar pattern, each action tied to survival and care, and he liked it that way. Yet beneath the surface, Daniel carried a quiet ache. He was not unaware of the world beyond his fences. He had once tried in his younger years to attend town dances or join community events, but they always left him anxious and restless. People's voices seemed too loud, their movements too hurried, and he felt as though he were walking through a storm in his own mind. It was easier to return home, to the ranch, to the quiet companionship of animals, and the wind through the grass. Still, on some nights, he would sit on the porch after a long day, watching the sun dip behind the hills, and feel the loneliness settle in his chest. Despite his reserved nature, Daniel was deeply connected to the land. He knew the patterns of the seasons, when the river would rise, when the grass would turn green, and when the storms were likely to come. The land had taught him patience and respect. Each morning he walked the pastures with a careful eye, noticing which calves were healthy, which fences needed repairs, and which fields required tending. His hands bore the marks of hard work, calloused palms, and sun-worn skin, but he wore them with quiet pride. The ranch was not just a job. It was his responsibility, his anchor, and his world. On one particular morning, Daniel's routine was interrupted, though he did not know it yet. The sun had just risen, spilling golden light across the hills, and the air was cool and fragrant. He saddled his horse, a sturdy brown mare named Willow, and rode out to check the northern pastures. The cows had wandered farther than usual, nibbling at the young shoots of spring grass. Daniel guided them back with practiced skill, speaking softly, his words barely carrying across the fields. Willow moved smoothly beneath him, the familiar rhythm of hooves against the earth calming his thoughts. As he rounded a small rise, Daniel paused. In the distance, near the edge of the river, he saw a figure he had never noticed before. At first he thought it was another rancher, though none had come to his property in years. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. A woman, kneeling beside a horse that seemed to have injured its leg. Her dark hair fell across her face, and she moved with careful precision, tending to the animal with gentleness and skill. Daniel slowed Willow, unsure of whether to approach or turn back. He had never seen anyone like her before. There was something commanding in the way she worked, yet her movements were calm and deliberate. Daniel's curiosity overcame his hesitation. "Excuse me," he called softly, his voice hesitant. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment he felt a strange pull, an unspoken connection that he could not explain. The woman studied him carefully, her expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Hello," she replied, her voice steady. I didn't expect anyone to be out here. I... I live nearby, Daniel said, dismounting slowly. That horse? Is it hurt badly? It twisted its leg, she explained, her hands still working to bind it. I'll be fine. I just need a moment. There was a quiet strength in her words, a confidence Daniel could not ignore. He felt awkward, unsure if he should offer help, but something about the situation nudged him forward. I can help, he said, keeping his voice soft. I know a bit about horses. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Together they worked in silence, adjusting the bandages, steadying the animal, and speaking only when necessary. Daniel found himself observing her carefully. She had a presence that was impossible to ignore. Graceful, strong, and unafraid of the rugged world she had stepped into. Her eyes held a depth he could not read, and yet there was kindness there. By the time the horse was stable enough to walk, the sun had climbed higher in the sky. Daniel and the woman led it carefully back toward the riverbank. Thank you, she said finally, her voice softening. I'm Ayanna. Daniel, he replied, nodding. For reasons he could not understand, the simple exchange made his chest tighten. As they walked, Daniel noticed that Ayanna's movements were confident, even in this unfamiliar place. She seemed attuned to the land in a way that mirrored his own connection, and yet there was a sense of freedom about her that he had never experienced. He felt drawn to her presence, yet wary. A lifetime of solitude had taught him caution. After ensuring the horse was resting safely, Ayanna turned to him. I should keep moving, she said. I'm heading north to my family's land. But I appreciate your help. Daniel nodded, feeling an unusual ache at the thought of her leaving. Take care, he said simply, unsure what else to say. She smiled faintly and mounted her horse. You too, Daniel. Maybe we'll meet again. And just like that, she rode away, leaving a trail of dust and the lingering sense that his quiet life had shifted, even if he did not yet understand how. Daniel stood by the river for a long time after she left, watching the water flow and the sunlight glitter across the surface. The prairie seemed the same, vast and silent. But something within him had changed. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of curiosity, a whisper of possibility that stretched beyond the fences of his ranch. That evening, as he returned home, Daniel found himself looking at the fields with new eyes, the tasks he performed so routinely. The fences, the cattle, the barns, felt smaller somehow, as if they were part of a larger story he had yet to understand. He made his dinner in silence, the memory of Ayanna lingering in his mind. He did not know if he would ever see her again, but he knew that the quiet rhythm of his days had been broken. And perhaps he thought that was not such a bad thing. Daniel went to bed that night with the windows open, listening to the wind rustle through the grass and the distant sound of the river. For the first time in a long while, the silence was not empty. It was full of questions, full of possibility. And somewhere deep in his heart, Daniel Harper, the shy rancher, felt the faintest stirrings of hope. The next morning, Daniel woke with the sun again, but the memory of Ayanna lingered like a soft echo he could not shake. The prairie felt alive in a new way, each rustle of grass and bird call seeming to whisper possibilities he had never considered. As he stepped outside to feed the cattle, he noticed a distant figure moving along the riverbank. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? Sure enough, it was Ayanna. She was tending to her horse, which looked much healthier after their encounter yesterday. Daniel hesitated. He had no plan, no words prepared, but something inside him urged him to approach. Slowly he saddled Willow and rode toward her, keeping his pace calm so as not to startle either her or the horse. Ayanna noticed him almost immediately, her dark eyes lifting to meet his. She gave a small nod, a mixture of surprise and recognition in her expression. You're here early, she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I just wanted to make sure your horse was all right, Daniel replied, his voice uneven. It's doing fine? Yes, she said, smiling faintly. Better than I expected. Thank you again. Daniel nodded, unsure what else to say. He had never been one for small talk, but he felt the strange pull of wanting to remain nearby, to learn more about this woman who had entered his quiet life so suddenly. It was a moment of silence, filled only by the soft whisper of the river and the distant lowing of the cows. "You live alone here?" Ayana asked suddenly, her curiosity gentle, not intrusive. "Yes," Daniel answered simply. "My family passed some years ago. The ranch is mine now." He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Most strangers would have found it odd to live this far from anyone, but Ayana seemed different. She listened without judgment.
I understand.
She said, nodding. "I've spent much of my life on the land as well. My family has property further north. I travel sometimes to visit relatives and care for animals." Daniel felt a flicker of connection at her words. There was something about her confidence, the ease with which she spoke about life on the land, that made him feel less alone. He wanted to ask her more, to know her story, but words were not his strong suit. Instead, he offered her a gesture he was more comfortable with. "Would you like some water? I keep a fresh spring by the old barn."
Ayana's eyes softened. That would be nice.
"Thank you." They rode together slowly to the barn, the horses moving in quiet harmony. Along the way, Daniel noticed how naturally she adjusted to the terrain, her movements fluid and balanced. He had always known his own skill with horses, but watching her reminded him that some people were born with an instinct for the land that could not be taught. At the barn, Daniel filled 2 small cups with water from the spring, handed one to her. "It's good to see someone who understands animals," he said after a pause, his voice quieter than he expected. Ayana smiled. "Animals teach patience," she said, "and respect." "You have a good ranch here, Daniel. It's clear you care deeply." Her words struck him more than he expected. Compliments were rare in his world, and hearing her speak with sincerity made him feel both proud and shy at the same time. He looked away, focusing on filling a bucket for Willow, but the warmth in his chest remained. Over the next few hours, they worked together on small chores. Ayana helped mend a fence post that had weakened, showing a skill and precision that impressed Daniel. He felt a mixture of admiration and relief. Admiration for her abilities, and relief at having someone willing to share the work. "You seem at ease with this," he said quietly, trying to mask his curiosity. "Most people don't know where to start with repairs like this." "I grew up learning," Ayana replied. "Sometimes it's the only way to survive on the land. You learn to see what is needed before it becomes a problem." Daniel nodded, understanding immediately. There was wisdom in her words, and a reminder of his own life spent caring for the ranch in silence. They worked without further conversation for a while, each absorbed in the rhythm of labor, but the quiet was comfortable now, not oppressive. It was shared, a gentle companionship that neither had anticipated. As midday approached, they rested under the shade of a large oak tree near the pasture. Daniel passed her a piece of bread he had packed, and she accepted it with a soft, "Thank you." For the first time in years, Daniel felt at ease with someone sitting nearby. There was no rush, no expectation, only the soft hum of life around them. "You must be careful traveling alone," he said eventually. "The prairie is beautiful, but it can be dangerous if you're not prepared." "I know," she replied, her gaze distant for a moment. "I've had my share of challenges, but I also know how to handle them. You've already helped me once." She paused, then added softly, "I appreciate it." Daniel felt a lump in his throat, something he rarely experienced. Words of gratitude, when sincere, could unsettle him, yet there was comfort in them. He wanted to respond with something more than a simple nod, but he only managed a quiet, "It's nothing."
I'm glad you're all right. As the day wore on, Daniel realized that his usual routine had been transformed.
He had spoken more in a single morning than he had in weeks, yet the interaction felt natural, not forced. He began to notice things he usually overlooked. The way Ayana's hands moved deftly as she worked with the animals, the soft laugh that escaped her occasionally, the way she seemed to belong to the land as much as he did. When it was time for her to move on, Daniel felt a surprising hesitation. "Are you sure you need to leave today?" he asked quietly. Ayana looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I have to reach my family land. They are expecting me." "But I'll return this way again. There was a promise in her voice, gentle yet certain. Daniel nodded, a strange warmth spreading through him. I'll see you then, he said, his words simple but full of meaning. As she rode off toward the northern hills, Daniel watched her disappear into the distance. He felt a mixture of longing and excitement, emotions that were foreign, yet welcome. For the first time, the prairie did not feel empty. It was filled with potential, with possibilities, and with a sense of connection he had not known he was missing. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself reflecting on the encounter more often than he expected. He went about his chores, but his thoughts drifted to Ayanna and the brief moments they had shared. He realized that her presence had stirred something within him, something he could not name. It was not just admiration or curiosity. It was the realization that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with another person. He began to take small steps, noticing the world around him more deeply. He paid attention to the birds in the trees, the river's gentle flow, and the way the sun moved across the prairie. Each moment felt heightened, alive, as though Ayanna's brief presence had opened a door to a world he had long ignored. By the end of the week, Daniel's routine had subtly shifted. He still tended the ranch with diligence, but there was a newfound lightness in his step, a quiet anticipation that something extraordinary could happen at any moment. He began leaving small offerings of water and fresh hay near the river, hoping she might return, though he tried not to admit it even to himself. One afternoon, as he repaired a fence near the northern pasture, he saw a familiar dust cloud on the horizon. His heart leapt. Could it be? As the figure came closer, he recognized Ayanna instantly. Her horse moved steadily, and she waved as she approached. Daniel felt a warmth spread through him that he had never experienced before. "You're back," he said, smiling despite himself. "I promised," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "I wanted to see how the ranch was doing, and how you were." Daniel felt a nervous laugh escape him, unusual for someone so reserved. "Everything's fine. Better now, I think." She smiled, and the prairie seemed to glow in response. Daniel realized that his life, once quiet and predictable, was beginning to change in ways he could not have imagined. Ayanna's presence was no longer just a memory. It was becoming a part of his daily world, and he welcomed it with an open heart. For the first time in years, Daniel Harper felt the stirring of hope, the gentle pull of connection, and the possibility that life could be richer when shared with someone who understood the land, and perhaps understood him. The following days brought a quiet rhythm that was different from Daniel's usual routine. Ayanna had returned, and though she claimed she was only passing through, her presence transformed the ranch in ways Daniel did not fully understand. The mornings were no longer silent. Instead, they were filled with the soft murmur of conversation, shared laughter, and the occasional clatter of tools as they worked together. Daniel found himself noticing her in ways he never noticed anyone before. The determined way she tied knots, the careful way she brushed the horses, the way her eyes sparkled in the sunlight.
Ayanna had a way of moving through the world that seemed effortless.
She could sense the needs of the animals, anticipate problems, and solve them with quiet skill. Daniel, who had spent years mastering his own methods, found himself learning from her without even realizing it. She taught him small things, like the best way to mend a fence quickly without straining the wood, or how to soothe a restless colt by speaking softly and shifting his weight just right. At first, Daniel was hesitant to accept advice. He had spent decades believing he knew best, but Ayanna's calm confidence made it easy to listen. They spent mornings repairing fences, checking on the cattle, and tending to the pastures. Sometimes they walked the fields side by side in silence, each lost in thought, but connected by the shared task. Other times their conversations drifted to stories of childhood and family. Daniel had never spoken much about his past, but Ayanna had a gentle way of drawing him out. He told her about his parents, the lessons they had taught him about the land, and the small joys he found in caring for the ranch. Ayanna, in turn, shared her own story. She spoke of growing up on her family's land further north, of riding through forests and rivers, and of the lessons learned from her elders. She spoke with pride and affection, but also with honesty about the hardships she had faced. Daniel listened, fascinated by the life she had led, a life both similar and very different from his own. He felt a connection forming, not just through shared work, but through shared understanding of what it meant to live close to the land. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of the old oak tree, Ayana looked out across the fields. "You know," she said softly, "most people don't notice the small signs the land gives them. But you do."
"You've always had that gift." Daniel felt a warmth spread through him.
Compliments were rare in his life, and hearing her words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I suppose I've learned to pay attention," he said quietly. "It's the only way to survive out here."
Ayana nodded, her eyes thoughtful.
"It's more than survival. It's respect. And you have that, Daniel." The praise, simple yet sincere, lingered with him long after she had finished speaking. He realized that her presence was changing him in ways he had not anticipated. He felt more aware, more alive, more willing to step outside the walls he had built around himself. And yet, he was also aware of a tension he could not name, a worry that her time on the ranch was temporary, that she would leave and the quiet of his old life would return. As the days passed, Daniel began to notice small challenges that tested both of them. A sudden spring storm swept across the prairie one afternoon, dark clouds rolling in with little warning. The wind howled, shaking the fences and scattering the smaller animals. Daniel and Ayana worked quickly, securing gates, rounding up the cattle and sheltering the horses. Rain fell in sheets, soaking them both, and the river near the ranch swelled dangerously close to the fields. Daniel's heart raced. He had faced storms before, but the force of this one left him uneasy. He shouted instructions, his voice almost drowned by the wind, and Ayana moved beside him, calm but focused. Together they managed to lead the animals to higher ground, securing them under a grove of trees until the worst of the storm passed. As the rain eased, Daniel stood panting, soaked to the bone, and watched as Ayana guided the last of the cattle to safety. He felt a mixture of relief and awe. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper over the soft patter of rain on the grass. Ayana smiled, brushing rain from her hair. "We make a good team," she said simply. "You handled yourself well, too. I could see your skill in every decision you made." That evening, as they returned to the barn, Daniel found himself reflecting on the storm. It had been dangerous, yes, but it had also revealed something he had not expected: the power of working together. For the first time, he realized that he did not have to face the world alone, that companionship did not diminish him but strengthened him. And for reasons he could not explain, Ayana's presence had made even the storm feel manageable, even meaningful. In the following days, their bond deepened in other, quieter ways. Ayana showed Daniel how to track small signs in the fields, the subtle bends in the grass that indicated where water would pool, the footprints that revealed the movement of wildlife, and the signs that predicted weather changes. Daniel absorbed the knowledge eagerly, grateful for her patience and clarity. In return, he taught her some of the ranch's secrets: the hidden watering holes, the safest paths through dense brush, and the methods he had used for years to maintain the land. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, they shared a simple meal outside the barn. The sky glowed pink and orange, and the prairie was alive with the soft hum of evening insects. Daniel found himself talking more freely than he had in years, laughing at small stories from his childhood, and listening as Ayana shared her dreams for the future. "You really know this land," she said, her eyes bright with admiration. "It's as if it's a part of you." Daniel shrugged, feeling a flush of modesty. "It's home. And I've had time to learn it." Ayana's gaze softened. "You've done more than learn it. You've cared for it. That's rare, Daniel. Most people forget to notice what's around them, too busy with other things." Her words stayed with him. Daniel realized that he had spent so much of his life focused on work, on survival, that he had never considered how others might perceive his efforts. Ayana's recognition felt different, not a judgment, but an appreciation, and it stirred something he had long suppressed, a desire to share more of himself, to open the walls around his heart. The community also began to notice Ayana's presence. On a trip to the small town nearby to gather supplies, Daniel saw curious glances and heard whispers. Ayana carried herself with a quiet confidence, and her connection to the land was evident. People who had never paid much attention to the Harper Ranch now looked with interest. Daniel, ever shy, felt a mix of pride and discomfort. Yet, with Ayana beside him, he found he could face the small town stares and questions with ease he had never known. Despite their growing closeness, Daniel remained cautious. He had never been comfortable with social situations or emotional vulnerability, and he worried about what might happen if he let himself care too deeply. Ayana, perceptive as ever, seemed to understand this without needing explanation. She gave him space when he needed it, and yet her presence was constant, steady, and reassuring. One afternoon, as they rode the northern pastures, Ayana paused on a rise overlooking the ranch. "It's beautiful," she said softly, gazing at the fields stretching below. "I can see why you've stayed here all your life. This place, it has a rhythm, a soul." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "I never thought anyone else would notice it like you do," he admitted. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Maybe it's because we see the world in similar ways. You and I, we understand it differently than most, but in ways that matter." The words lingered between them, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Daniel realized that he had begun to rely on her presence, that her companionship had become an integral part of his daily life. The shy, quiet man who had once shied away from connection now found himself looking forward to shared tasks, conversations, and even the simple moments of silence together. As the sun set and the shadows stretched across the prairie, Daniel and Ayana returned to the barn. They worked together to secure the animals and prepare for the evening, their movements coordinated without words, a silent understanding born from days of shared labor. For the first time, Daniel felt a sense of belonging that extended beyond himself, beyond the land, beyond the routine that had defined him for so long. That night, as he lay in bed, Daniel reflected on the changes that had come into his life in just a few short weeks. Ayana's arrival had shifted something deep within him, an openness, a willingness to trust, and a recognition that life could be richer when shared. He did not yet know what the future would hold, but he understood that his quiet days on the prairie were transforming, that a new chapter had begun, and that he was ready, perhaps for the first time, to embrace it fully. Spring was changing into early summer, and the prairie had become alive with new growth. The grass was tall and green, and wildflowers dotted the fields with bursts of color. Daniel had grown accustomed to Ayana's presence. Their days had a rhythm now, checking cattle, repairing fences, preparing feed, and sharing stories as they worked. The ranch, once quiet and solitary, hummed with a new energy, one Daniel had never imagined. But life on the prairie was never entirely predictable. One late afternoon, dark clouds rolled in from the west, faster than Daniel had anticipated. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the sharp tang of the river. He had just finished mending a broken fence post when he noticed the first drops falling, heavy and fast. The storm was coming quickly, and with it came danger. "Willow, let's get the animals back to the barns," Daniel called, urgency in his voice. Ayana had already noticed the darkening sky. She grabbed her horse's reins and nodded toward the cattle. "We have to move quickly." Some of the calves are near the lower pastures. Together they rode through the fields, urging the cattle towards safety. The wind howled, whipping through their hair and rattling the fences. Thunder boomed overhead, startling some of the animals into panic. Daniel's heart pounded as he tried to keep them calm, shouting instructions over the roar of the storm. Ayana's voice cut through the chaos. "Daniel, this way." The trees provide shelter near the north pasture. He followed her direction, guiding the frightened cattle toward the grove. The rain poured down, soaking them instantly. Their clothes clung to their bodies, and their hands were slippery from mud and wet rains. Daniel felt a pang of fear, not for himself, but for the animals. He had spent his life caring for them, and the thought of losing even one filled him with dread. By the time they reached the grove, several calves were already struggling to keep up. Ayana moved between the larger cows and the younger calves, guiding them gently with voice and touch. Daniel felt a surge of gratitude and awe. Her calmness in the midst of chaos was remarkable. Where he had panicked, she had acted decisively, and together they began to regain control. One calf, small and frightened, slipped on the muddy ground, twisting its leg painfully. Daniel rushed to it, trying to lift it to safety, but it resisted, whimpering. "Ayana, help me with this one," he called, struggling to keep hold of it as the wind threatened to topple them both. Ayana moved beside him without hesitation. "Steady here, let me guide it," she said. With her help, they managed to lift the calf and lead it toward the shelter of the trees. The storm battered them, but they did not falter. For the first time, Daniel realized that he was no longer facing the dangers of the prairie alone. Ayana's presence was steady, grounding, and her courage emboldened him. Hours passed as they worked to ensure every animal was safe. Daniel's muscles ached, and the cold rain sapped his energy, but he refused to stop. He had never felt more alive, more aware of the strength that could be found in partnership. Ayana moved beside him constantly, her calm voice guiding him and the animals alike. They were a team, and he marveled at how natural it felt. Finally, when the last of the cattle was secured under the trees, Daniel and Ayana stood soaked, mud-streaked, and exhausted. The storm continued around them, but the animals were safe. He looked at her breathing heavily and realized that this shared struggle had brought them closer than anything before. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice low but sincere.
I don't know what I would have done without you." Ayana smiled, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes shining despite the storm. "You did well too, Daniel."
"You guided the herd, made the decisions, and stayed calm when it mattered most. I only helped." Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. He had always thought of himself as quiet and reserved, someone who could handle solitude, but not the complications of people. But Ayana had shown him that strength came not just from independence, but from connection, from shared effort, from trust. As the storm began to ease, they rode back toward the barn, the fields glistening with rain. The river had risen dangerously, but their quick thinking had kept the animals safe. Along the way, Daniel realized that he had been holding back in ways he had not recognized, emotionally, socially, and even in terms of his own courage. Ayana's presence had forced him to confront not just the storm outside, but the storms within himself. When they reached the barn, they began the long work of checking each animal, ensuring no injuries had gone unnoticed. The rain had softened the earth into mud, making their tasks more difficult, but neither complained. They moved together in rhythm, unspoken communication guiding their actions. Daniel felt a deep sense of trust, not just in her, but in their partnership. After the chores were complete, they found a dry spot under the barn's overhang. Daniel removed his wet jacket and offered it to Ayana, who shook her head. "I'll be fine," she said. Instead, they shared a quiet moment, sitting side by side and watching the storm clouds gradually break, revealing a sky streaked with orange and purple as the sun began to set. "It's strange," Daniel said softly, breaking the silence. "I've lived here all my life, but I've never felt this alive. Not like today." Ayana turned to him, her gaze steady and warm. "It's because you faced it together. Life is never as frightening when someone else is willing to stand by your side. And I think you've always been braver than you give yourself credit for." He looked down, unable to meet her eyes fully, but the words settled in his heart. He realized that this crisis, terrifying as it had been, had changed him. It had shown him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And it had shown him that connection, friendship, trust, perhaps even something deeper, was worth the vulnerability he had long avoided. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed subtle changes in himself. He spoke more freely, laughed more often, and allowed himself to enjoy Ayana's presence without overthinking it. He found comfort in shared meals, in long rides across the prairie, and in the simple act of working together. Ayana's influence was quiet but profound, teaching him patience, trust, and the value of partnership in a world that had once felt solitary. Yet the storm also left Daniel aware of the fragility of life. One wrong decision, one misstep, could have resulted in tragedy. The experience reminded him that the world was unpredictable, and that preparedness, courage, and trust in others were essential. Ayana had helped him see that, and in turn he felt a deep responsibility to protect not only his land and animals, but also the bond that was forming between them. One evening, as they sat by the barn fire, drying their clothes and sharing warm food, Ayana spoke softly. "You've changed since I arrived," she said, her tone gentle, almost teasing. "You're more open, more aware, and not as shy as I first thought." Daniel chuckled, a sound that felt foreign yet freeing. "I suppose I've had a good teacher," he said, glancing at her with a shy smile. Ayana's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps. But it's not just me. You've done the work yourself. You've faced fears, taken action, and allowed yourself to care. That's a choice, Daniel." For the first time, Daniel understood the depth of her words. For the first time, Daniel understood the depth of her words. The storm had been more than a natural event. It had been a turning point. It had forced him to confront fear, embrace partnership, and realize that solitude was not the only way to live. He had faced the chaos of nature and emerged stronger, not just physically but emotionally. As night fell and the prairie quieted, Daniel Harper felt a profound sense of gratitude. The shy, solitary rancher who had once feared connection now understood that life's most meaningful moments often came from facing challenges together. And he knew, without doubt, that Ayana's presence in his world had changed him forever. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not alone, where shared struggle and shared joy could coexist, and where the prairie he had always loved could become a place of connection, courage, and hope. Summer was settling over the prairie, and the fields were alive with tall, golden grass that swayed gently in the breeze. Daniel Harper had changed in ways even he was still discovering. The shy, solitary man who had once measured his days by routine now found his life filled with anticipation, laughter, and the quiet thrill of companionship. Ayana's presence had become a constant, grounding force, and her influence on him was undeniable. The morning began as usual, with the two of them walking through the pastures, checking cattle and horses. Daniel noticed that even small things, like the way Ayana laughed when a calf stumbled, or the way she encouraged a stubborn horse, filled his heart with warmth. He realized that these moments, once mundane, now held meaning because they were shared. The ranch no longer felt like a world he carried alone. It was a place alive with life, connection, and shared purpose. Ayana, too, seemed at ease in the Harper Ranch. She had begun to make small adjustments, leaving signs of her presence without disrupting Daniel's life. Fresh water by the barn, extra hay stacked neatly for the animals, and small notes with observations about the land had become part of their routine. Daniel discovered these little acts of care and felt an unfamiliar sense of joy. He wanted to reciprocate, not just through work, but in ways that mattered to her personally. One afternoon, as they rode together toward the northern pastures, Ayana paused on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The sun was warm on their faces and the prairie stretched endlessly, gold and green, under the sky. "Daniel," she said softly, her eyes scanning the horizon, "you've done something remarkable. You've built a life here that's steady, strong, and full of care. It's more than just surviving. It's thriving. And you've done it without losing yourself." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. Compliments were not something he was accustomed to, yet her words felt like a mirror, reflecting a part of himself he had never truly acknowledged. I suppose I've tried," he said quietly. "But having you here, it makes everything feel easier. Lighter." Ayana smiled, a subtle warmth in her expression. "I'm glad. Because it's not just your strength that matters. It's your openness, your willingness to let others in." You've grown in ways even you might not realize. Daniel looked at her, searching for the right words. For once, he felt confident enough to speak from his heart. Ayana, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. Having you here, it matters to me more than I can explain. The afternoon faded into evening, and the sky was painted with pink and orange streaks as the sun began to set. Daniel and Ayana returned to the barn, where they tended the animals for the last time that day. The tasks were familiar, but their companionship made them feel less like chores and more like shared moments of care and trust. Daniel realized that every simple task now carried a new weight of meaning, because it was experienced with someone who truly understood him. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch settled into a comforting pattern. They rode together daily, repaired fences, fed the animals, and shared stories by the fire in the evenings. Daniel found himself laughing more easily, speaking more freely, and opening his heart in ways he had never imagined possible. Ayana's influence was quiet but profound. She did not force change, nor did she demand attention. Instead, her presence simply encouraged him to step out of the protective shell he had built around himself. One evening, as they sat on the porch after finishing chores, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass, Ayana spoke. Daniel, I've been thinking, my family's land is farther north, but I don't want to leave here. Not yet. There's something about this place, about you, that feels right. Daniel's heart swelled. He had feared that her stay was temporary, that she would leave, and his life would return to its former solitude. But her words erased that worry.
I'd like that too, he said quietly. I don't want you to go.
Not just because of the ranch, but because of you. Ayana smiled, reaching out to gently touch his hand. It was a small gesture, but Daniel felt a warmth spread through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time, he realized that love, quiet, patient, and nurturing, was possible for him, even after years of solitude. The following days were filled with small, shared moments that deepened their bond. They worked side by side in the fields, shared meals under the shade of the oak tree, and laughed at minor mishaps with the animals. Daniel found himself noticing her in every detail, the way she brushed hair from her face, the gentle way she handled the horses, the sparkle in her eyes when she told a story. He realized that life had become richer, fuller, and infinitely more meaningful. One afternoon, while repairing a fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, Daniel paused and watched Ayana guide the cattle to a safer pasture. He felt a quiet awe for her skill, confidence, and grace. Ayana! He called, his voice carrying across the fields. I don't think I could ever thank you enough for being here. You've changed my life. She looked back at him, a gentle smile on her face. And you've changed mine, Daniel. You've shown me patience, kindness, and the value of quiet strength. We've learned from each other. As summer deepened, their relationship grew in quiet, meaningful ways. They began to plan for the future together. Simple plans at first, like planting new crops, repairing older barns, and expanding the grazing fields. Daniel felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. The ranch, once just a place of work and solitude, had become a home filled with life, laughter, and connection. One morning, Daniel woke early, watching the sunrise spill gold across the fields. He realized that his heart no longer carried the weight of loneliness. Ayana's presence had filled the empty spaces he had long accepted as permanent. He felt gratitude not only for her but also for the unexpected ways life had shifted, how a chance encounter had grown into a partnership, a bond that neither of them could have predicted. As they rode together toward the northern pastures, Daniel felt a quiet determination. He wanted to cherish this life, protect it, and nurture the bond he shared with Ayana. I never thought I'd feel like this, he admitted softly as they guided the horses over the rolling hills. Like my life could be more than routine, like it could be full of connection. Ayana looked at him, her expression tender. And it can be, Daniel. It already is. We've built something together, something strong, steady, and real. Don't ever doubt that. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the prairie. Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. Life, once predictable and solitary, had transformed into something vibrant and alive. He knew there would be challenges ahead, storms to weather and obstacles to face, but he also knew that he would no longer face them alone. Together, he and Ayanna could meet whatever came their way. As the day drew to a close, they sat on the porch of the barn, watching the animals settle for the night. Daniel reflected on the journey he had taken, from a shy, solitary rancher to a man who had discovered connection, trust, and the possibility of love. He felt a quiet pride, not in his accomplishments alone, but in the bond he had nurtured with Ayanna, a bond built on shared work, shared stories, and shared courage. "I never imagined life could feel like this," Daniel said softly, his gaze resting on the horizon. "Sometimes the best things happen when we least expect them," Ayanna replied, her voice gentle. "You've opened your heart, Daniel, and in doing so you've changed everything." The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden and green, alive with wind, wildlife, and the soft rustle of grass. Daniel felt a sense of hope and joy he had never known. His life, once quiet and solitary, had become full, meaningful, and rich in ways he could not have imagined. And he knew with certainty that this new life, shared with Ayanna, built on trust, courage, and care, was one he would cherish forever. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above the prairie, Daniel and Ayanna sat side by side, hands brushing, hearts connected, and souls at peace. The ranch, the land, and their shared life had become a testament to the quiet, transformative power of connection. Daniel Harper, once the shy, solitary rancher, had discovered that life could be richer, fuller, and more beautiful when shared with someone who truly understood him. And in that moment, under the vast starlit sky, he knew that life had changed forever.